folks that John knew when he was there were still there when I went in, and both of us lament the loss of civility in the Congress these days. Certainly we can talk about that a little bit this evening if you all like. But with regard to the first question that Mike posed, areas of overlap among all the different components on the ideological spectrum, from the left to the right and the center and so forth. If there were several examples while I served in the Congress where we were able to remove the facade of partisan politics, party politics, and put coalitions together, informal coalitions that really accomplished, in terms of protecting civil liberties, some real tangible results for the American people. One was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act in 1996. The version that eventually passed the House did not include many, much more onerous provisions that the Republicans had wanted to include in there, and that was because we fashioned a group back in '96, including the ACLU, the NRA, Eagle Forum, and several other groups to protect privacy, and we were able to, we had an amendment to remove a lot of those provisions. Second time was a few years later when we were able to obtain, certainly not all that we would have liked to have seen, but we were able to obtain some important amendments scaling back the asset forfeiture laws that had been passed in the late 1980s and have been terribly abused since then. And the third example was the USA Patriot Act. Even though the bill passed without the amendments in it, a lot of the amendments that we wanted, immediately after it was introduced, we pulled together sort of that same coalition that we had pulled together 5 years before. The ACLU, the NRA, several other conservatives and more liberal groups, because we recognized then, and we did the same thing in 04 and 05 in trying to prevent some of the provisions of the Patriot Act from being reauthorized. We had a group of folks that recognized that if we didn't put aside our differences on other issues and fight the encroachment of government power into individual liberty, then government wins every time. So there have been several examples, Mike, in which we've been able to do that. The groups have come together. It's unfortunately becoming harder and harder with the advent of partisanship overtaking everything else.
I just want to mention one thing that Bob did, which we did that. California, which you may not know, has the greatest asset forfeiture law, assuming you have to have one in the world. And asset forfeiture, basically, if one of you had 2 grams of cocaine and maybe was going to give half of it to one of your friends, the cops could have come in without you being convicted, without you being put on trial, taken over ownership of the university. I mean, that's how stupid it was. And we put together a coalition, and it was with the liberals, the NRA, the conservatives, the bankers, because somebody owned a house and the grandson was caught with some marijuana. They could take the house away, and the bank could lose the dough. So there were these issues where people, at least rational people, assuming they think we're rational, did a lot to protect individuals, because the government unchecked is like, fascism, Stalinism, whatever it is. I mean, it's really not what the hell they had a revolution about here.
Okay, I think we'll move on to, thank you. We'll move on to our second question, and my second question concerns the quasi-legal status of marijuana in California, or medical marijuana in California. Is there any agreement between left liberals and Tea Parties and Libertarians on whether people should have the right to use marijuana or medical marijuana, or conversely, should we legalize and regulate the use of it in California? And how does that play in national politics?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's agreement or not, because I'm not sure of their position. I think they're probably, at least for decriminalization, but medical marijuana has always been an issue that Democrats have pushed through the state legislature. legalize marijuana, probably, I mean, it doesn't offend me, I'm a recovering addict, so I get a little bit antsy about stuff, but I don't think that, marijuana necessarily is gonna lead people into, killing their grandmother for $10 to go buy a couple joints. But I can't speak for what a libertarian issue would be. I'm sure Bob is better exponent of that.
Do we need this, or is the room, do you need this for the recording, or?
I think we need it for the recording.
Okay.
And we're gonna do a collection afterwards and give them 2 mics the next time.
There's a case that probably at least all the students, and if they're practicing attorneys here also, are familiar with, particularly if you get involved in any drug cases, the Race decision. It's either Race v. Gonzalez or Gonzalez v. Race, depending on which one of the opinions you look at, from 2005. And it's a very interesting case because it will be, I think, somewhat difficult for some of the so-called more conservative justices on the Supreme Court to distinguish when the healthcare legislation cases come before them. And it has to do with the extent of the Commerce Clause power, allowing the federal government to trump state law. The 2005 Race v. Gonzalez case, in which Justice Scalia was in the majority, might have written the decision, I don't recall who wrote the decision, but he was in the majority, and that case really pushed the envelope of what I consider abusive extension of the power of the Commerce Clause. The federal government came in and prosecuted individuals here in California, notwithstanding the fact that the